I'd like to begin by saying fuck Lance Armstrong. Fuck him and his balls and his bicycles and his steroids and his yellow shirts and the dumb empty expression on his face. I'm tired of that asshole.
I was never really big on sports. Maybe that's a reflection of my social life as a kid growing up. I was never really a team player. But early on, I took an interest in the sport of cycling, which, although technically a team sport, allows the individual to train and ride all alone if they wish. At that time in America, cycling was virtually a non-existent sport. I can remember once in a while in the Bay Area of California, of all places, being snickered at because I had a slightly teardrop-shaped helmet. Part of me thought that I must have looked like a clown. But I now know that I was actually a low-level pioneer of sorts, experiencing how some people react to new ideas. It was no different than the reaction when I was the first to wear black athletic shoes to my junior high school. They called them mailman shoes. Everyone knows the name Lance Armstrong, the American who won the Tour de France 7 times. But America had already become more interested in cycling by the time he won his first tour. And now we know he won all 7 with the aid of doping and blood transfusions. Did you know that not long before Armstrong there was another American cyclist who also won the Tour de France 3 times without the aid of performance-enhancing drugs? It's true. That man's name is Greg LeMond. Greg became the target of a campaign to ruin his life because he refused to watch silently as the world became transfixed by evil. The story of Lance Armstrong, his rise and fall, is really the story of America, its power players and institutions. But we're only at the midway point of that story. The question is, which role will you play? That of Lance himself, one of his psychopathic co-conspirators, or Greg LeMond, the hero of the story? You may find it hard to believe that common sense and truth itself were rendered ineffectual during the reign of Armstrong. To some degree, the saga of Lance Armstrong and its connection to a greater problem in America and the world led to some things being upside down. For instance, the rise in awareness of cycling in America wasn't just the appreciation of the sport. It was largely because of greed and fraud. Through the Armstrong Foundation, there was a growing perception that cancer's attack on the innocent people it afflicted was being challenged finally. Instead, cancer was allowed to devour all it could eat, while money shifted around and people got rich in the process. Because the world was fooled into believing Armstrong would never resort to doping, few even considered the possibility that the testicular cancer he acquired was the result of doping. Research that had been underway into the connection between certain performance-enhancing drugs and cancer virtually came to a halt as a result. Those that angrily spoke out in opposition to the fraud were smeared, their voices ignored by the media. In 1999, during a stage of the Tour de France that involved a grueling climb that was particularly difficult for riders who weren't specialists in climbing, an epiphany was taking place for some familiar with cycling as they watched Armstrong being filmed up close and personal during the climb. I myself am a climber, familiar with the pain from the strain that climbing puts on your body and the effect of being at your anaerobic threshold for extended periods. Greg LeMond was watching. A friend that was watching with him whispered to him in Italian, "He's on the juice." The wife of one of Armstrong's teammates thought to herself, "There's no pain in his face. He's talking into his microphone. Where is he getting the oxygen?" During that stage and at so many other times, what enabled Armstrong to attack and build leads of 30 seconds, a minute, or more was the performance-enhancing drugs and other prohibited techniques. In other words, he cheated. In 2008, I happened to be in New York joining my family on a vacation. Because I announced my plans to join them late, I wasn't included in the group that secured tickets to the Late Night with David Letterman show. However, although I called my request for a ticket in late, I got the call back, answered the trivia question correctly, and secured a ticket to the same show. As fate had it, one of Letterman's guests was Lance Armstrong. I already had my suspicions that Armstrong had been doping. 2008 was also one of the last years that Armstrong could visit with Letterman without the light of truth getting in the way of his humanitarian act. So it doesn't surprise me looking back that he dressed in all black as if he was attending a funeral. There was a somber tone to the interview, and the whole show for that matter. Armstrong established a non-profit foundation very early in his battle with cancer that eventually grew into the behemoth Livestrong Foundation. It became one of the top cancer charities in the world, well known if not because of Lance himself, then through the infamous yellow wristbands connected to the charity. The foundation had big plans from the beginning, as early as 1999. It spared no expense on its corporate headquarters in Austin, Texas, and paid its employees in the upper tier among nonprofits. Think about it though. Lance and his cycling organization was always seeking sponsorship, which as it turns out simply equates to money if you choose to look at it that way. The line between Lance Armstrong, the personality and sports commodity, and Livestrong, the nonprofit cancer foundation, became very blurred very early. One very easy to understand example of this was when in 2008, a health and fitness website was created called Livestrong.com. This site had nothing to do with the nonprofit charity of the same name. You can see how the existence of the charity became a key component of the Armstrong brand and very influential when it came to sponsors and endorsement deals. This unprecedented arrangement didn't just benefit Armstrong, it also benefited his agents and business partners. Some of those partners included two of his largest team sponsors, the U.S. Postal Service and Discovery Channel. They sponsored his team through 1998 and 2005, during which he won all of his Tour de France titles. These are well-known institutions. Is it possible they were aware all along of the sophisticated doping program Lance had established to become so dominant in the sport? Considering how business is done in the world, it would be shocking if they weren't. As it stands, Armstrong has been dumped by every major sponsor, which is odd if you consider that he still has never actually admitted to doping after 2005, and neither did he admit to pressuring other teammates to dope or to aiding them in doing so in any way. As far as Lance is concerned, the 15 teammates and 11 other witnesses who testified to the contrary are just engaged in a smear campaign. Armstrong once took the stage alongside U.S. presidents, dated pop stars, and even considered running for governor of Texas. It seemed for a time that anything he touched turned to gold. He had many millions of fans who appreciated his cycling skills and perseverance. But he also had many fans who appreciated him because he was the center of a whirlwind conspiracy, one that was easy for some well-positioned people to get in on. For over a decade, Armstrong was saddled with allegations and legal troubles relating to his doping. At a certain point, the ever-mounting troubles became too much of a liability for his strategic fans, and they walked away almost in unison. His true sports fans seemed almost oblivious to the turn of events, and even to this day continue to admire and praise him, despite being stripped of all 7 Tour de France titles. Amongst many out-of-court settlements, mostly brought to recover bonuses and other monies he earned contingent upon his world championship title status, there was a federal investigation, a United States anti-doping agency investigation, a whistleblower lawsuit, and other lawsuits, some of which are ongoing. What Lance Armstrong has revealed about our world is, things are not as they appear. He was just one component of a much larger operation involving an unknown number of strategic partners. Some of those partners were institutions like the U.S. Postal Service. Others were politicians, including presidents like Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. The Cancer Foundation that once bore his name can't be overlooked. The many sponsors like the Discovery Network, Nike, and the list is a mile long. It's very unlikely that you're one of Armstrong's former strategic fans. Hopefully, knowing the gravity of his fraud will lead you to reconsider if you were once a fan of his cycling or other abilities, or if you were just a fan of the man. But more critically, how will you judge the institutions that joined with Armstrong but weren't called to task this time? Is his saga not a metaphor for similar fraud and corruption in our government, the companies we do business with, the actors and performers that entertain us? The winds of change are blowing, and it's a good thing. Don't believe the hype. Choose your own heroes.
I'd like to begin by saying fuck Lance Armstrong. Fuck him and his balls and his bicycles and his steroids and his yellow shirts.